pánové, mé jméno je Behenský, já jsem tady ze chemického průmyslu. Pokusím se nějakým způsobem navázat na co to tady
I'm a representative of the Chemical Industry Association of the Czech Republic. I would like to follow up on what has already been mentioned. I am a member of the younger generation, and I would like to comment on what the older previous speakers have said. Let me speak about the implications of the Green Deal policy and the current energy prices on the availability of fertilizers in the EU. We can think about what can be improved as regards the farming policy. The truth is that what Mr. Jandisek has mentioned about the negative impacts of the Green Deal on agriculture, this is a fact that's happening, and we see it in the chemical industry as well. If I was to criticize the Green Deal for something, first it would be the time frame, as it has been said, because certain things cannot be sped up, and physics, that's something that you can't circumvent. And then secondly, there is only little dialogue led with representatives of manufacturing and industry. We often see that ways are sought to achieve the objectives, but the arguments are often based on the scientific basis. These are not listened to, and that's a shame, because all that may lead to, as opposed to compromise, that we all went to rejection or a radical liquidation of the industry and agriculture, which nobody wants. So dialogue is essential. However, what I'd like to speak about today, there are two issues. First would be the impact of the energy crisis and events in Ukraine on the price of fertilizers and chemical production at large in the whole EU. The truth is that after the farm to fork strategy has been adopted, chemists and farmers are closer to one another than ever before, because fertilizers are used by producers in farming. And then I would like to speak about the relationship between Green Deal and the price of fertilizers. I disagree with what we sometimes hear in the media, that the high price of fertilizers is caused by the Green Deal. I'll explain why. I would also like to highlight one specific feature, and this is the European Commission's vision of how we should address the issue of availability of fertilizers in the EU. Actually, even though it is well thought through, it is not viable in the time frame that the EC requires. However, let's first go back to the price of fertilizers issue. Undoubtedly, everybody knows that the price of fertilizers and chemicals in general is linked to the price of oil and natural gas. So this chart that I've borrowed from the quoted source shows what the price development has been after the attack on Ukraine. We can see that the price of natural gas has increased roughly tenfold, and the production of fertilizers is based on natural gas consumption. It's not about the energy sector, but rather the use of hydrogen, physical reaction, so hydrogen that it's used in natural gas. And if we look at it, that from the perspective that natural gas is the main component of fertilizers production, the price of fertilizers needs to rise hand in hand with the price of natural gas. So when we see this tenfold price increase, we have to increase prices or restrict production. This is what many producers have done. And on the following slides, I'll show that. Who has restricted production. We can, however, see the price of natural gas going down, and it's possible to discuss to what extent the price of natural gas soared as a result of speculations on the market, so say 30% perhaps accounted for that. On the other hand, there was demand for natural gas because otherwise nobody would have purchased for that price, and the price wouldn't have been kept at that level for a long time. We can see on this chart the impact of natural gas on the whole chemical industry. So this is a survey that we did across the members of the Chemical Association members. And up until the crisis in Ukraine, up until the time when natural gas soared as much as it did, the chemical business was fairly balanced. The costs of energy, material were higher than the energy costs, which is better. And there was guaranteed profit at a time when the price of natural gas reached the astronomical amount. I dare say this ratio has shifted. So the price of energies in production exceeded the price of raw materials. And at the same time, we can see that the profitability in the chemical industry has been put to a halt. So the chemical industry has been forced that based on the natural gas prices, either it would sell the products at a loss, which is nonsense, and nobody's willing to do that, or stop production and thus limit the availability of fertilizers on the European market, which has led to an increase in their price as a result. And here I hope that you can see this chart clearly. So you can see how the main fertilizer producers have been restricting, limiting their production as a result of the soaring natural gas prices. Producers all over Europe, based on the soaring natural gas price, either have limited their production or stopped it altogether. And the amounts are significant. So sometimes production was limited by 35–40%, or there have been complete stoppages of production. We were all waiting to see what's going to happen. We were hoping for the ECU Council to intervene, and we also hoped that the market would intervene. However, at a time when most production companies stop their production, at a time when farmers need to use fertilizers, the fertilizers also increase in price, and that has a huge impact on farmers as a result. So what has happened? Regarding external impacts, this chart shows the impact mainly of nitrogen fertilizers and their production outside of the EU. So basically the EU in nitrogen fertilizers does not play a leading role, so China is the main producer. The EU produces practically what it consumes. There is some export, but we mainly produce what we use. The main reason being that the primary raw material, natural gas, is imported. Other raw materials are not available or not at least in sufficient amounts. At a time when chemical production in the EU, as a result of the soaring natural gas price, the production, at that time, the producers outside from outside of the EU have started pushing themselves into the European markets, and regarding communication of availability of fertilizers, there have been opinions saying that we should open the market, and then, well, I'm very glad that the EC has maintained the anti-dumping measures on imported fertilizers, but we need to answer the question whether replacing the dependence on Russian natural gas or replacing this dependence would be best met by importing from outside of the EU. We believe that fertilizers used in the EU, in particular the nitrogen fertilizers, should be produced in the EU and shouldn't be imported. That's our opinion, because it may happen in the future that these fertilizers can be used for the same extortion, just as natural gas has been. And imports are from countries that 10 years ago were not seen as friendly countries, and we cannot predict how they'll be seen going forward. So we have to protect our interests and fertilizers production. And this chart clearly shows that the EU is not a major fertilizer production. One other chart that I'd like to share with you that also sheds light on the situation related to war in Ukraine. If you look at the history of the price of ammonia, which is the fundamental raw material for nitrogen fertilizers, you can see that in 2008 there was similar development, just like after Russia attacked Ukraine this year. In 2008 there was yet another crisis in Ukraine, so the price of natural gas soared, the price of ammonia as well. Then it started to decline because the situation de-escalated after a certain period of time. However, we are seeing no de-escalation of situation in the Ukraine now, but there is certain historical development that copies the changes, and now we see the ammonia price going down somewhat because, well, natural gas is getting to the European market, and companies have resumed production. The reason why I've decided to share this slide with you is that I believe the price of fertilizers and natural gas is unrelated to Green Deal, even though, well, due to some speculative matters, it may be related, but it's mainly related to the political and war situation in Ukraine. And here, let me move to a summary, but I can perhaps skip that, and you can read that later. But now let me move to the EC's proposal of how to address the availability of fertilizers in the EU. In relation to Green Deal, the EC has proposed that we have to replace natural gas from Russia by alternative production. And that is basically the production of green fertilizers. Theoretically, that idea is very good. To put it simply, you produce green energy based on that, on the basis of electrolysis. You produce hydrogen, water. You don't need natural gas anymore. As a result of that, you separate nitrogen from the air. You join it together with hydrogen, and you have the main raw materials for fertilizers production. So that idea is correct as such. I understand why the EU is pushing that and why it sees it as a way out of this crisis. What is bad, however, is the funding, the timing, and decontextualization of it all. Because in order to replace the current production and consumption of green fertilizers in the EU, and so to replace the existing fertilizers by green fertilizers, we would have to be producing such equivalent of green energy that would compare to 15 or 20 Temelin nuclear power plant productions, and that's just for the green fertilizers. The same greening presumption is for steel making companies, households, etc. Whether we can achieve that in 10 years' time or in 30 years' time, at a time when in Europe there is high pressure against nuclear power, which is not seen as green, then there is also pressure on using the energy production for other purposes than green fertilizers. So I dare say that the objectives are unachievable. If we strive to make fertilizers green too quickly, we won't be able to create such a product that can compete with the import that I have described at the outset of my presentation. So if we do not take into consideration physical matters, we need time, we need money, we need to lead dialogue with the Commission at technical level. So if that is not respected, it may happen that chemical production in Europe will come to an end. The same applies to the production of fertilizers. And the question is not whether there'll be enough European fertilizers on the European market, but rather the question will be whether there will be any fertilizers whatsoever and at what cost. So let me try and appeal that we should indeed go back to discussions on physical grounds, so whether the objectives are achievable at all, because at this stage the political debate is not dedicated to these themes, and we believe that from the perspective of the chemical industry this is wrong. So much from my side. Thank you very much for your dedicated attention.